and welcome to the PocketGamer.biz podcast. I'm Craig Chapple, the head of content at PocketGamer.biz, and I'm your host for today. We're doing something slightly different today. We still have the lucky Peggy doing fantastic interviews for us, but I'll be picking up more video content into the next year, so you get even more insightful interviews to watch and listen to with industry experts on the hottest trends. So today, we've got Michael Rubinelli, the Chief Gaming Officer at Tyranno Studios, which rebranded from Wax Studios a few years back now. The team is gearing up for the launch of Spin Tycoon, a new PvP strategy game for mobile. Michael has extensive industry experience across Disney, EA, Mattel, and others. So I thought it would be great to get him on the show as we close the year and get his thoughts on recent industry trends and how companies can navigate them and how they've also done so in the past too. So without further ado, welcome Michael to the show. How are you doing?
I'm amazing, Craig. It's a Friday and we get to talk gaming. I mean, what could be better?
It's a perfect way to end the week, honestly.
Indeed.
So, could you give me a bit more of a detailed intro on your extensive background in games and what you're up to right now?
Yeah, I've done this for a little bit, or my entire adult life, if you will. Not to age myself, but I did start back at Electronic Arts in the early 90s, making John Madden football. And that was kind of how I was educated or brought up into the world of gaming. I had a dream. I thought I could do this. Nobody told me I couldn't. And the EA took a chance on me. And, lo and behold, here I am. I went from EA and being a designer on Madden and a bunch of EA Sports titles to, running worldwide product development at THQ. I was at Capcom, Midway, as you mentioned, as well. And then in 2010, I was thinking about building my own startup. And I went to a guy named Nick Earl who ran kind of all West Coast or North American studios of Electronic Arts. And he's a friend of mine. And we were talking back and forth about kind of building studios. And, we kind of always mentored each other throughout our careers. And he said, you should go talk to a guy named John Pleasance, who's building social games on Facebook at a company called Playdom. And I said, I have no idea what you just said. Like, it might as well have been in Klingon. I'm like, social games on Facebook, John, what? He's like, trust me. He said, even if you don't like the job or you're right for the role, it'll be the best day of your life. So that was a real kind of high praise. I said, okay, I'm going to go investigate this John Pleasance guy, and come to find out John Pleasance is maybe one of the greatest people I've ever worked with. And I went to Playdom, and kind of my free-to-play career took off from there.
So you probably answered my first question a little bit there. You've obviously been through a few industry shifts and trends, and you mentioned Playdom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So as the industry...
all of them, right.
So as the industry, I mean, there's many trends before these ones I'm going to say, but we'll be here all day if I name them all. We've moved in kind of browser casual, mobile, free-to-play, live ops, games as a service, Web3, moving to AI now. What are some of the more dramatic shifts that you remember that shook up the industry that you were part of?
There's a bunch that are really, really clear, and you can do it by platform, right? So if you look at kind of the regular Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, and the Genesis at the time, or Mega Drive, those are all kind of 2D kind of action and sports games. And then with the advent of, N64, PlayStation 1, it became all about 3D gaming, right? That was a huge shift, 2D to 3D. And it's like, wow, cool. And then PC was kind of experimenting with, LAN play. And, you look at Doom, you look at, games like Command & Conquer. All of a sudden, multiplayer became this huge trend then in kind of the late 90s. And so you go 2D to 3D to online to multiplayer to free-to-play to mobile to Web3 to live ops and on. And like those are kind of the big tent poles, if you will. And I think the interesting thing that I always notice is that, and it's really clear, like you can look at history, there is a roadmap that shows you how these things work. Business model / platform transitions are extinction events for companies, right? How many great companies made games for the regular Nintendo or Super Nintendo that aren't in business anymore? They couldn't make that shift, right? And going from, 3D to online multiplayer, couldn't make the shift, couldn't make the jump, And because these platform transitions and business model evolutions are extinction events, we know that as a species, like our 2 million year old survival software, which is our brain, which protects us from ourselves, right? Like, oh, that Tyrannosaurus Rex is going to eat me, I better run away. We are wired to survive, right? So failure or fear of loss is a huge motivator. And extinction events like business model transitions are scary. And if you can't handle that, you're not going to take the risk. Well, you're also not going to thrive. You're not going to survive. You're not going to move forward. And so a lot of times these shifts keep people on the sidelines and it ends up costing them. So yeah, we saw that a lot with Web3. Free to play, same. I went back to Nick after we had a lot of success at Playdom, and I said, you should be in the free to play space. And he said, why? I said, because it's going to be all the rage. He said, okay, let me get this straight. You spend what, $500,000 to $1 million in development back then? I said, yeah, sometimes less. He goes, okay, You have no pre-sales because back in the day on console and disc and what have you, you had your pre-sales right at all the various software stores, which drove a lot of your marketing activities. So you spend money, you've got no sales up front. People can download and or play the game for free. Yep. And when they pay you 25 cents or maybe 99 cents. Yep. And they don't all pay you, about 1% pay you. Yep. And you think that's a scalable business model? I said, I do. He's like, you're crazy. Like, they don't see it. They don't get it. And it takes somebody to lead the way. So if you look at free to play, right? What companies were born out of free to play? Zynga, Scopely, King, some of the biggest brands in the world, multi-billion-dollar revenue generating companies were there first, not because they were better at it, but because they were built for it. They were wired for it and they knew how to lead the way. And then once they saw that it worked, everybody else shifted. And I'll leave you with one interesting anecdote from the EA example. So there was a group called EA Partners that used to take on kind of third-party titles. They would look at how do we kind of fill out our portfolio with titles that we don't build. And there was a game called Simpsons Tapped Out. And it was like 9 to 12 people somewhere in, I want to say, northeastern Canada that were building it. EA had procured the license from Matt Groening and that studio. But this group had a game, and it was, on iOS and iPad. And it was, a few $100,000 to build, whatever it was. Like, it wasn't a lot. And it was throwing off $500,000 to $1 million a day in cash when EA had no expectation for it. And they're like, wait a minute, how does this work? And so they went in, they did a deep dive, and I think they kind of saw the light there. But it took a product that they had very kind of like they had no aspiration or no ambitions for to really break out and say, this is the model. Like, you should understand that there is a path here, economically viable path, that your consumers want to take. And so that was a real eye-opening moment for them.
So this leads nicely into the next questions I had, actually. So when you were at Playden, and you're building kind of social and free-to-play games for social networks, that's pretty new at the time, right? And as you were saying,
sure.
what is free-to-play? People are like asking, and you were like, what did you say to me? And then and it was like, but what is it like getting into those areas that are quite nascent?
It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. So let me tell you what my experience was. So I had like my entire career, like growing, evolving, a lot of commercial success, a lot of critical success, because I was the target audience for what I built. John Madden football, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, on and on and on. Like all these very blue, very aggressive games, PvP, sports related, what have you, or action games about cutting people's heads off, showing their spine still attached. Like those kind of moments really resonated with me, for better or for worse. Like, okay, I know what to build because I'm my audience and my tastes inform the product and creative decisions, the feature set, what have you, right? That's real straightforward, real simple. I got to play them, and it was a bunch of, Stanford grad kids speaking a language in acronyms that I had, like, CAC and, DAU and ARPDAO and LTV. And I'm just like, I didn't understand this dialect. So right away I kind of felt, and I wasn't that old, but these young kids are talking a mile a minute, speaking a language or a dialect that I did not understand. And I said, well, great, let's talk about the kind of games we build. Like, oh, we build games for, Midwestern housewives. And I'm like, oh boy, I don't do that. And I don't speak the language that you speak. I have no idea. Like I'll never forget, I came home after a few days, the end of my first week. And I told my wife, I said, I'm pretty sure they're going to fire me in a week or two because I don't make these games. I don't speak their language and I have no idea what they're talking about. And she said, look, you're a smart guy. You kind of always figure it out. Keep your head down, ask the right questions, don't break too many eggs when you don't know what you're doing. And she was right. After about kind of 6 to 8 weeks, I had this real epiphany, like, oh, it's totally freeing operating off of analytics, right? Like you can't have a game that's purely about like, oh, here are all the best practices when it comes to monetization, retention, engagement, and virality. Like you can't do that. If you go too far, if you overcorrect and you go too far to the side of the science and you don't embrace the art, you're going to fail. Certainly Playdom had several of those experiences. Like it's just all best practices, therefore we win. And that was the naivete of the company at the time, because a bunch of young kids that didn't have the scar tissue of building games that were actually enjoyable to play. I think they looked at games like, Farmville and Mafia Wars and said, oh, these are just virality optimization exercises. They're not actual games or software toys. And to a large extent, that was relatively true, but there still had to be a joy in the interactivity. And so once you have that notion that you can operate with freedom and know that you can get immediate feedback on whether what you put out there is enjoyable or not, like at EA, we would run a focus group. We'd get, 20 people in a room. We'd feed them a bunch of pizza. We'd say, hey, here's the latest Madden. What do you think? They're like, and by the way, when you leave, you get a free game. The 20 people are like, we love it. I'm like, of course you do. We just gave you pizza. You're on our campus and you get a free game. They're total selection bias. But at Playdom, we're like, okay, let's run a test with 40,000 people that we don't know who they are. And let's just see what they do. It's this real freeing notion of, okay, I see here they like this, they didn't like that, they churned here, or they doubled down there. And it became this like, now it doesn't matter what I know, it only matters what I can prove. And operating with that mindset became really freeing. It actually encourage you to test worse things sooner, if that makes any sense. Like really, really crude pre-alpha. It's just a core loop. It's placeholder text. It's placeholder art, but you can get a signal relative to other games in a similar state. So it's initially terrifying, but it's ultimately freeing. In fact, I called up Nick later and said, look, if you don't embrace free-to-play in 18 months, you're a dinosaur, because this is where the world is going, I assure you. And in fact, Disney bought Playdom for that kind of that muscle memory, or that training, if you will. They didn't have it. And at the time when the purchase was made in 2010, Bob Iger had announced his retirement. And like a lot of CEOs, they worry about their legacy, right? I don't even remember in 2010, he's like, in 2013, I'm retiring. It's like, okay, Bob, thank you. And his whole charter then was, I'm going to transition Disney from old media to new digital, right? And so Disney Plus came out of Bob Iger, and everything that we did, Disney would embed different groups in our studio, and they would be a PM for a week. Animation, Alani, Disney Cruise Lines, ABC, like it didn't matter that they didn't build games. They were brought in to understand dashboards, tickers, A/B testing, live ops, like all these things, because he knew that he wanted to move the company to that kind of mindset, that fast fail, let's operate off of business intelligence and understand telemetry. And it was fascinating. The Disney people would come out of those 1 week kind of training seminars where they would actually, launch a feature and look at its performance and then triage that feature. This is the best week of my life, because you're taking these people that are stuck in their ways theoretically, and now you're showing, look, you're now adaptable, right? Now you too are future proof. You can now operate and speak this language just like the rest of us do. So it was wonderful.
A couple follow-ups there. One thing I was thinking about was, like, if you're a big publisher and you kind of slow moving, that's actually a really interesting way that you were saying there to kind of adapt to new tech, which is actually just have people across the company, even if it's slightly different area, joining a team for a week and just learning. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to follow up there is, I kind of wanted to say, like, how do you build a new company and build that expertise for something that's new, which you kind of answered. But is it like you're creating new ways to work with a new business model? So you're kind of using what you know, but you also have to think, well, how do I do something new?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting to me is the way that I look at it. Like, look, I know it's kind of, a lot of people like to quote Steve Jobs, and they hold him up as the example for certain things. But he said something to me that I've always kind of latched onto really smart. Back in the late 90s, he was at a WWDC, and he said, you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology, right? He said a lot of people, they start with the technology and try to figure out where they're going to sell. And then he goes on to say, I'm more guilty of this than anybody. A lot of people say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we built this thing? Opposed to saying, what does the customer need? What does the customer want? Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is their friction? Is the kind of the thing that doesn't allow them to live or operate or do the things they want. And then let's build that, right? So anytime I look at building a company, or I build a feature, or I build a product, you have to start with, well, what problem for the consumer are we solving? And if it's a big enough problem and you have an elegant enough solution that you feel like is novel, then that is a path worth going down. You can't build vanity tech just because you like it. You can't build vanity tech just because you can. You can't have these pet projects or passion projects that don't have, a really meaningful use case. And so you have to be really objectively honest with yourself about, okay, great, I have a passion for doing this and I love it, but will anybody else? And I think that's where a lot of people fail, because they so fall in love with their ideas. To put a finer point on that, a lot of people say, oh, follow your passion. Like, that's how you'll be successful. But I think lately I've heard a lot of, like, don't follow your passion. Like, that's a terrible idea. Follow whatever it is that you're great at, right? Whatever you think you're the best in the world at, like, that's the path that you should go down. That's what you should pursue. So when it comes to, building a company or building a feature or doing something meaningful, if you are objectively great at it, then you should go ahead and pursue that. Don't chase a dream, because the dream may lead you to nowhere.
At companies that you've worked at, so we're talking about Playdom, you were kind of getting in on something new. So you're kind of creating this new business models and that. What do you do if you're at a company that isn't an early mover, but you want to get in on something new? So the example that kind of comes to my mind is, I don't know, if you're like Supercell got in early on free to play, right? But if you're a Rovio and a Zynga, sorry, mobile free to play specifically, if you're a Rovio and a Zynga, you're a bit late to that. And then you spend years actually restructuring your entire business. Yeah, I guess, how do you adapt to something new? when you've already got like this solid business?
Well, let's take those three examples because I know
Mm.
those business cases, and I know the people who run those companies very well. Rovio, the founder, is family funded, and they shipped 16 games before Angry Birds that were all abject failures, right? But the guy who founded it, his father was well-to-do, and they just happened to just hit their stride with Angry Birds. It was not like, oh, they were so close and it was great, and they just finally were discovered. Like, no, it was a lot of luck. And then if you look at the follow-ups that Rovio had, they weren't great. Now they've found their way, right? But it wasn't like this obvious aha epiphany moment, like that's what Rovio did that nobody else did. Like even they struggled, right? And that's kind of the point. Even they struggled. Mm-hmm. If you look at Supercell famously copied and cloned Zynga and Kixeye. Supercell's two biggest games initially were Heyday, right, which is a Farmville knockoff. And Farmville was a knockoff of the Chinese game, so it's all copy and clone, right? But that's where live ops and free-to-play comes in, so that's an interesting evolution. You could do an hour just on kind of the farming game.
Oh, God, absolutely.
World. But, if you look at Clash of Clans, which was massive, like people are like, oh, this game's so incredible. Like, yeah, it's called Backyard Monsters, and Kixeye did it on Facebook. But Kixeye was too slow to pivot. Like we said, platform transitions are extinction events. Kixeye was too slow to pivot to free-to-play mobile. And it birthed a whole entire company and a whole entire industry. Like you can literally map the hit points, the unit utility, the barriers, like the base growth that lives in Clash of Clans to the latest version of Backyard Monsters. And Backyard Monsters was brilliant, but it only lived, in Java or in Flash, on Facebook. And that's all it was. And Battle Pirates was the other huge, Kixeye game. They tried to do something similar at Supercell with Boom Beach, which wasn't as successful because it wasn't quite, architected the same way. I think a lot of times we want to think that these companies are, great and they're forward thinkers, but they're opportunists, right? And so Zynga eventually moved into free-to-play. If you look at Zynga Poker, it's still massively popular. If you look at Empire and puzzles that they have now, like that's just a ripoff of Puzzles and Dragons. But again, it's really well executed. It's really well live operated. And that's what Zynga's super strength is. They are the best kind of live operators in the world in terms of their audience, in terms of virality, in terms of monetization. Like they are so good at that. But they're not forward thinkers, right? They're not, in fact, when they've gone out of their way to be creative and clever, and they have very creative and clever people there, those things haven't done as well. So I think to answer your question, what have they done is that they have figured out what they're really, really good at, what their strengths are, and they played to their strengths. And they saw that from an opportunistic standpoint.
Yeah.
Supercell said, here's great games on Facebook that aren't going to mobile. We'll be first movers to mobile. Great. Zynga, we're going to dominate, World Series of Poker is huge. We're going to dominate on Facebook, and then we're going to bring that to mobile. And then Rovio, again, physics-based puzzle games on the mobile device as their 16th entry into the market finally worked for them. Good for them.
So we're talking about extinction events, the shift in extinction event. But what do you think is actually better? A first mover advantage or a second mover advantage? Do you let someone else fail?
Great question. It depends on your scale, right? If you're a small company, it's you and three of your buddies and you're working out of your garage and you're working for free or at a discount, you can take that first mover shot because your upside is huge. If you are an EA or if you are an Activision or other companies that are typically kind of acquired, they're not builders, they're buyers, right? They don't have, for something to work for them, it's got to work at scale. Like there was a point in time at EA where they weren't greenlighting anything that didn't have $1 billion revenue potential because the infrastructure, the support, the machinery was such that it wouldn't allow them to model out, yes, let's greenlight this game. Look, it's not going to make $1 billion. It's not worth our time, right? And a lot of people have these problems of things don't work at scale. So depending on where you're at in your company's life cycle, where you're at in your company's growth, I think that's why the first mover advantages come from these really hungry, really aggressive folks because they have a lot less to lose. We talk about fear of loss as the motivator. You'd want it to be hope for gain, but it's fear of loss. And so, fear of loss motivates EA to be a second mover and to have all these companies be second movers. Whereas if you don't have that much to lose because you're a couple guys with a dream, great, knock yourselves out.
It actually, just from the one example, an interesting wide example, I guess, of Supercell, it actually feels like they did both. So they were first mover to mobile, but they were second mover to the genres that they took advantage of.
Yeah, I think that they said, here's something that people like to do, but they don't get to do it here. Right? Yeah. It was really opportunistic. It was really smart. And they weren't a huge company at the time. And then if you look at everything they tried creatively after that, with the exception of Clash Royale, which is just brilliant. I mean, Clash Royale to this day still, I think, is one of the best kind of original, strategy games on mobile. And I think the charts would bear that out. I still think it's in the top 10 today. You know what?
It had a big resurgence recently.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Their flagship game.
They're so good at building community. They're so good at making sure that the meta is adjusted constantly. I mean, they're really wonderful people. But if you look at how long, I mean, as good as Supercell is, look at how long it took to get Brawl Stars going. Like Brawl Stars, clever, creative idea, 3-on-3, matchups. But it was like 2 years, and they had, I think it was April of 2024, like 2.5 years after they launched, was their largest revenue month on their entire history. And it wasn't like just creeping up for 2.5 years. Like, no, it had this, like they figured something out, right? They're like, oh, the community loves this plus this plus this. This has really unlocked it for us. So you can be a market leader and still not always know the lessons because tastes shift and everything shifts. And it's not blue ocean or blue skies, so to speak. It's really messy out there.
I remember Brawl Stars very well, covering it for the couple of years, and I went to the studio for the launch, and then it was actually I think it was actually like at least 5 years later that was the record revenue.
Right.
He said he'd never seen that before at any company.
Right. And you'd think, well, it's Supercell. Shouldn't they have seen that sooner than 5 years out? But it's surprising what we learn about the ever shifting tastes of players. And like one trend I think that is really hard for a lot of traditional game makers to make when they shift to mobile is in the old console days, the behavior was, this is the big Q4 title. I'm going to buy, Resi 4, Resi 5. Like, I'm going to play that. I'm going to finish it. Then I'm going to move on to this game. And then it's the fall. So I'm going to buy the latest Madden or the latest whatever. And you play games for 3 or 4 quarters at a time. But this online persistence became a huge thing. Like even with Uncharted, which is a great one-player game, the Uncharted series, there's a great multiplayer component that after you finish the story, like that has bled over into mobile. And now when you look at the charts, I kid you not, I believe the number one strategy game on the mobile charts today on the App Store is Clash of Clans, 13 years old. It's not like, and then there's a bunch of new entries. Like, no, if you look at the average age since launch of the games at the top of the App Store, they're all 5, 10, 12 years old. Like it's hard to break in because people are playing fewer games for much longer periods of time. And that's an adjustment economically that companies have to make. It used to be like, oh, we're only competing with this fourth quarter release. Like, no, you're not. You're competing with something that came out 10 years ago. And it's got a well-entrenched audience and they spent a lot of money. So they're not going to leave their account anytime soon because they're very vested and on and on and on. That's kind of the downside of free-to-play gaming is that a lot of people are retained through guilt. Like, well, I spent this much, I can't quit now. Not like, oh, I've got 12 years of innovation and 12 years of great memories. It's like, no, I've got 12 years of spending. So therefore I can't quit. I'm pot committed, if you will, right? And that's kind of the downside. And I think that's where Web3 is a nice kind of potential release, if you will, for those players. And now feel good about monetizing because they can sell their stuff or they can sell their account. Even if it's pennies on the dollar, it's a zero-sum game currently and it doesn't need to be.
All right, we'll go on to Web3 in a second.
No, let's stay right here. Yeah,
I'll push back a little bit on the. It is obviously it is true that old games, particularly on mobile, are the ones that people still play now. I think in strategy, there's been a bit of innovation recently. So games like First Funds, Last War, Century Games' Whiteout Survival. If you're looking at 4X. A bit different from Build a Battle, I guess, Clash of Clans, but they're now like the top games by far, and then they blend like other gameplay styles, right? Like from hyper casual. Yeah. But Clash of Clans does still do very well.
Yeah, if you look at the top 10 in the App Store, I think 4 of the top 10 games have survival somewhere in their title. Like survival as a category is actually massive, to your point. It used to be just, in the old days, right? It was just, oh, what's your survival horror game, right? It was Silent Hill, it was Resident Evil, and that was the genre. Now it's just survival, right? It doesn't matter if it's zombies, it doesn't matter if it's Whiteout, it doesn't matter if it's Last War. Like survival is a whole kind of thing, and I think that if you look at Clash of Clans, Machine Zone, you look at Rise of Kingdoms, that was kind of what the strategy ilk was for from 2012 to 2019, and then of late. These survival themed games have really gotten a foothold, which is nice to see because you do like to see new ideas come to the fore. And it's a perfect play pattern for the mobile gamer, right? I can play for 5 minutes or I can play for an hour and I don't fall behind. I have enjoyment the whole time, which is kind of what to me is the benchmark of, is this a good use of my time?
So we mentioned Web3. So you worked at Wax. So Tyranno is like a rebrand of Wax Studios,
yep.
I think. So I guess how did you feel about the earlier opportunities in the space? And where do you think things are now? Because I think for all of the investment that there has been, it's not really taken off.
Oh boy, how many hours do we have to discuss this topic? 7 or 8? Okay, I'll start. Look, a lot of the things that I didn't understand about free to play when I started that I learned very quickly were empowering. I felt those same pulls to pay to earn or P2E or Web3, if you will. This whole notion of I bought this stuff that I own, that I have full control over, and it may appreciate, it may depreciate, but I own it, right? Therefore, I don't feel bad about spending it because I can give it to a friend of mine to play, or I can sell it for, like I said, cents on the dollar. I'm not pot committed, so to speak. I'm not super pregnant with it. I felt like I understood the value in that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I was a person who bought a lot of gold in World of Warcraft and EverQuest, and Diablo. I hate to say it, in Diablo Mobile initially. Was it Diablo Mobile or Diablo? One of the three. We had the auction house in Diablo. Like I bought the currency.
It's
and
Diablo 3, I want to say.
Yeah, I want to say as well. But the point was, like, I could spend in any of those games 2 hours doing my daily quest and get 3 million gold. Or I could spend $2 and get 3 million gold and not have to do the daily quests. Like my time, my free time to play the game that I love was worth way more than spending my free time grinding to get the currency. Then I play the game that I love. So I understood that kind of that tension. And that's what, Web3 is all about is you can mine a currency and sell it to somebody else. It's basically legitimized gold farming. And now there's NFTs, like, okay, you have something that's unique. We have provenance. We can show you the title. We can convey these things to a community. We have marketplaces set up. We have wallets that have ownership, control with, where you're custodial of your keys and there's all these things that were set up to really empower the player to have more agency and control over what they did. So that just as a construct was really appealing to me. And I get it. And when I was first brought in to Wax, one of the things I said, well, all my friends in the industry that are publishers should embrace this. Like this was when Axie Infinity, I'm like, yeah, that's not really a game. And I think that's built on a kind of a foundation of sand. It's all going to collapse because there's no real utility there. There's no real enjoyment there. There's no real progression there. It's just, if you have something that you can sell to somebody that, if there's more suckers than you're in good shape, right? But I'll never forget around that time, 2021, early 2022, I went to the head of the Sims through a proxy and I said, everything in the Sim should be an NFT, right? You should allow players to, because by the way, they're already doing it on the gray market. So let's just legitimize it. And then you can get a tax on it because it's happening anyway. So why not bring it out into the light? You get a benefit, encourage it, lean into it. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the answer came back. I can do exactly what I do every single day, not embrace anything Web3, grow my business 7% and keep my job. We talk about fear of loss, right? Like they don't want to shift to that economic model. They don't want to take that chance. Even if there was massive upside for them, they're like, look, I work at EA. It's a very cushy gig, great perks, great benefits. I work with the smartest people and the biggest brands. There's a lot to like about it. You want me to stop all that or change all that and embrace this thing that is perceived as risky? No thanks. And not only that, but I think there's going to be, kind of wide disparaging of this as a movement because the publishers view this as our margins are already too thin and we can't cut players in. Now, the backwards thinking of that is if players know that they can sell their stuff, your percentage of monetization is going to go up quite a bit, right? Because I'll spend because I'm not trapped. And if your percentage of sales is going to go up, your percent of players monetized is going to go up. That means your LTV is going to go up. And in addition to that, because players know that they can monetize and get out, then your cost for acquisition is going to go down. Your install costs are going to go down. So it hits them in the things that they feel the most pain. Like UA is the most expensive thing that all these publishers are going through now. If you look at the number of apps in the App Store, if you look at this bid-ask system, you look at kind of iOS 17 changes where you don't get IDFA benefits or IDFA now is prohibited. Like there's just all these things that have kind of blocked the good old days of mobile player acquisition or free-to-play player acquisition. Web3 was going to relieve a lot of that pressure, but nobody wanted to take the risk on it. And when they did, if you look at like Ubisoft, it was such a terrible implementation that it just further kind of engendered, ill will. And so I'm like, okay, that's not great. That doesn't help. Look, I still believe in Web3 very much. I still believe that players should own certain things. There should be a sharing. Like, I didn't license this from you. I am not renting it. I paid for it with my money. Let me do with it as I see fit. You can control it. You can take a vig of the sale. Great. Give me the free market choice to do with it as I see fit. And yeah, look, if NFTs and fungible tokens got a rebrand, like went to a publisher and said, hey, we need to, we just came out of a scandal, help dress us up and make us look better. We can call it something else. I think that'd be great. Every once in a while you hear, Rockstar is toying with the idea of, NFTs or fungible tokens. If they did it and they showed that it worked, then everybody else would follow suit. But yeah, it's that's what pulled me into the space, and I very much believed in it. Where it all fell apart, though, if you're kind of want to ask about kind of what that journey is, it all fell apart when all these people who were website makers effectively got into game development. I use the term loosely because it was GameFi websites, and it was not great. There weren't games; they weren't enjoyable. So people came in and said, people who were kind of crypto curious came in and said, "This is a joke. No thanks." There's a few kind of breakout hits, but none of them were breakouts because like, oh my god, this is so unbelievably fun to play. But I do know a lot of big kind of AAA studios kind of try to look into it and dabble, and there are some decent play experiences out there, but nothing. There was no North Star, which is what really helped, free to play. Like there was Farmville, there was Social City that we did at Playdom, there was Marvel Avengers Alliance at Playdom. There's a lot of free to play games that we did that sort of said this is how free to play works. That was the paradigm, and then everybody followed suit.
But do you not think so? I guess there's a few things around NFTs. So they've become kind of toxic, right? And I think even if you rebranded it, people would still know what it is and very uncomfortable with that notion. And I think to your earlier point is like the use cases that we've had so far for Web3 and then NFTs is that you said earlier, like, is it a tech? It's a tech looking for an audience, like looking for a problem rather than like, what is it? Thinking about a problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. Well, start at the
wrong way around. Is what I'm saying.
Start at the customer solution work. Well, the customer problem is I've spent all this money on this game and I am trapped. Like that's real tension.
But you can't take that. You can't take sword that you bought or that that costume that you bought to another game, right?
Yeah, let's not confuse interoperability with being able to sell what you've already done. Like if you look at like eBay and whenever it was, there was all these accounts being sold on eBay, and the publisher went to eBay and said, "You can't do this." It's called RMT, like real money transaction or real money transit, like it was something like that. And these players are like, "Look, I've got all the skins in Fortnite or in League of Legends or what have you, and I'm tired of playing this game, and I just want to sell my account credentials." They were selling them on eBay left, right, and center. And somebody famously spent something like, God, I know I'm going to get the number wrong, so I apologize. Something like $12,000 or $15,000 on their Fortnite account, and they sold it on eBay for that amount of money. And then Epic caught wind of that and then blacklisted that account. They're like, no, you don't. Like that's what players want. Players want to buy currencies from other players. They don't want to spend time grinding for gold. They don't want to spend time trying to get things that didn't draw for them. They just want to play the core game. We know that's true. If you look at Ultima Online, 30 some odd years ago, somebody bought a house on Ultima Online for $3,000 on eBay, and the industry lost their minds, right? You can tell me that this is a technology looking for a solution. I'm telling you, this is something that players want to do because they have done it, and they've done it at the risk of getting their account blacklisted, right? So I have so many
worried
games
that's like a pay to win element that players might not want.
I don't think it's like it's not pay to win. Like if I were to sell my League of Legends account, I have like 300 skins on my League of Legends account. I've been playing it for 17 years. I got 26,000 games of League of Legends under my belt. That's not pay to win. That's just I have all this stuff unlocked because it's not a pay to win game, right? It's just not. And even World of Warcraft's a role playing game. Sure, there's PvP, but that's not what drives World of Warcraft or what did drive World of Warcraft. Clash of Clans is not really pay to win either because Clash Royale and Clash of Clans, because when they do their esports comps, they're level caps, right? There's this great equalizers that they put in when anytime you want to compete, they want to say, we want to make sure that everybody's handicapped the same. And so there's this whole notion of I've collected all this stuff, I've crafted it, it's dropped for me, I bought it, I'm no longer interested in playing this, and I would like to leave, and I'd like to feel good about leaving. But I can't sell my account, I can't sell the items in my account, so therefore I am stuck.
So to follow on a bit from that, so I guess when we're looking at these trends, and then we'll go into AI as kind of to close this out, I guess, however long that topic takes. But I guess, how can you ever really tell if an exciting new trend or buzzword will take off or not? And then, like, when you're exploring that, is it incumbent, if you're a big company, to explore that? How do you do-risk that, etc.? Like, because so Web3, it's like, I guess we have to explore. It's kind of exciting. And now AI, we have to explore that. How do you do that?
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to look at each kind of movement or buzzword, if you will, or situation and apply it correctly. Like NFTs and fungible tokens and the blockchain and these cryptocurrencies, that is a technology, right? That is a product, utility, feature, use case, kind of ecosystem. AI is a tool, right? It's very different. what does it allow you to do now that you have, these models at your disposal? Like every single thing, 2D is okay. Now I'm going to revisualize kind of how does this world kind of come to life? Like, what do these things afford you the opportunity to do? And AI is fascinating that what it affords you to do in terms of where it collapses and compresses certain things, where it allows for better things to be built at a higher level, but not by machines necessarily, but by people. And so I think you have to take each implementation or each execution and say, okay, where's this going to impact the overall customer experience, right? So, I kind of frame it with, AI doesn't make, and we can talk about kind of the components of AI, and I have a lot of thoughts on kind of, the history of tooling and how it's been perceived. But I kind of like to say that AI doesn't make bad ideas good, but it makes good ideas testable much faster. And that's really the big difference, right? If I can take a good idea and test it sooner, that's really beneficial to me as a product creator, product operator, what have you.
And so I guess with what you've seen from the people that you talk to, and then maybe what you're doing yourselves at Tyranno, how are you integrating AI into your workflow at the moment? Or are you just looking at it? Like, what do you do? How do you do it?
We use it to compress and collapse, schedules of things. I give you one example, and it's going to be an oddly tangential example, but I think you'll see where I'm going with it. So when calculators first came out, people were like, oh my God, students will be terrible at math now. Calculator is going to make everything so easy. Math is still really hard, and you still have to know how to use a calculator. But what a calculator did is it removed the need to always do long division by hand, right? So it's like, okay, I know how to do long division, but if I have to do it every single time, it's going to slow me down. So the net effect was we went from when calculators came out in the 60s, early 70s, we went from teaching calculus in college, now teaching calculus in high school, and not, advanced placement students their senior year in high school. No, like, sophomore, junior year. Now you've advanced so quick mathematically through your kind of your grade school years, your middle school years, what have you, that you're now taking a higher level math sooner because you've compressed the need to remove the grunt work, right? And I look at AI the same way. It used to be, look, I have line art, I have pencil sketches, I'm going to storyboard, I'm going to ink and paint it, I'm going to lay out, I'm going to wire it, I'm going to rig it, I'm going to do all these things. Now what we're saying is you still have to have that process. You still have to have that hygiene. But what AI allows you to do is allows you to compress that grunt work. And the real benefit, I think, where we've seen is we've always said we want our highest value employees to be working on the things that give us the most ROI on their time, right? And so if programmers don't have to do low-level scripting, if artists don't have to do these concept sketches, they can work on kind of, final aesthetics, coders can work on feature implementation. They don't have to worry about optimization or, like I said, writing scripts and whatnot. Like that allows them to operate at the highest level more often and sooner. And so you think about that collapsing of that timeline, like that to me is what's the most freeing thing. It's not like, oh, I don't need half the artists I had anymore or half the programs I have anymore, but I can do better things sooner with the exact same number of people at a higher level. Like I love the idea of that, right?
Do you think this is the real deal? Is AI like actually a trend that you're finding useful right now, and you think
without question
has room to develop?
Without question, but I will tell you it's a cautionary tale. So there's a couple of, so I've been using AI for a little over a year and a half, and I use it in a lot of different ways, right? I use it to do everything from, strategic thinking on how do I kind of take on a category or how do I solve a problem to, I use it to storyboard. I use it to vibe code, gameplay prototypes. I use it to write. I'm writing a novel with it, but just because I can, because I'm trying to keep my tool set sharp. So I've kind of used it across a bunch of different disciplines. I even wrote a really I think really fun chatbot. And I'm not a coder necessarily, and so that means the code was slow and non-performative and all this stuff, but it works. And so I feel like I have a decent lens as a consumer and as somebody who builds products for a living. I will tell you that AI is great at certain things and terrible at other things. I think the knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, it's Google with a voice. It's like, no, it's not. Like, you don't want a generative search engine. Like, that's an awful idea, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why. They're like, oh, now I can just write a story. Like, it shouldn't, because the story it writes are terrible. So it can tell me if my idea is good or not. Like, no, it can't. It can just tell you if it looks like another idea, but it can't tell you how good your idea is. Like, so there's all these, I think, these really knee-jerk assumptions that people just make, like, oh, we'll no longer need X, Y, Z, that are not correct, right? Like, it's not an arbiter of quality. It's actually coded to be agreeable with you. So when I say, tell me if you think my idea is good, because they don't want to hurt your feelings, like, your idea is great. It's like, okay. And then I say, I want you to give me a really harsh critique. Like, is my idea bad? They're like, your idea is not very good. It's like, they're just matching my energy. They're giving me they're being agreeable with me. Even when I say, tell me if my idea is bad. Now you can say, tell me if my idea is good or bad. And there's all these ways that you can get around it. Like, you have it, you say, don't tell me something that you can't prove. Show me what your rubric is. Tell me your evaluation. Like, you get really good at understanding how to get around that obsequious kind of butt-kissing mentality that they have. So you have to be very dialed in on what your prompting is, right? Like, that's really, really particular, because just out of the box, AI is actually more dangerous to the creative process than it is helpful. I really believe that. I saw a guy, he's like, I put millions of my own dollars in this business idea that AI, every step of the way, told me how great it was. And I launched it and nobody cared, and I'm out all this money, and F them, and F, like, right. Like, don't fall for the lure of you're so good, because they want you to think you're so good, because they want to make you feel good about what you're doing. They don't want to tell it to you straight. So you got to be careful. You have to, it's a tool. Like I said, you have to know how to use it. You have to hold its feet to the fire. I actually take 3 tools and have them fight with each other to get what I think is a good answer, right? Between Gemini 3.0 and Claude Opus 4.5 and ChatGPT 5.1, I have them fight amongst themselves to get a good sense of what I think, because they are a good sparring partner, but they're not a final decision maker.
So one of my last questions, it's such a big topic, we could talk about like the ethics of it as well, but I think the question I wanted to ask, kind of based on this kind of theme that we're going through, is if you're running a studio, or you're running a big company now, do you go all in like on this technology, or do you kind of put it in incrementally? So by that, there's a good talk by Mishka Katkov, the constructor of Fun, at RoboCon recently, who kind of talked about this. So Apps Flyer, they believe they took effectively, it's like a few months off. I'm sure they were still doing lots of work, but effectively like a few months off to specifically train on AI tools. And then from that, they can now use it however they like, the stuff, however it helps them. So they now have the knowledge. Whereas other companies sort of slowly feeding it into the production process. I appreciate there's other things with games, 2 years into a game production, you probably don't want to change the pipeline, I guess, of tech.
Right. Yeah.
Stuff I probably don't know that much about there, but I imagine. So if it's you, maybe the answer varies, but how do you approach it?
The answer does vary. It all depends on what you have. Like I said, if you are a 2-man shop and you don't have an artist and you don't have a certain skill set, like, you can certainly code up, and I've done it. I've coded up a social media marketing person that's an agentic AI, right? There's a whole scaffolding that you can build. You can create frameworks, and you can figure out what it can do for you. And provided, you use AI to also generate that content, there, now you have a social media person that can automatically kind of fire off things to the various platforms and help you build a strategy and all that fun stuff. That's great. That doesn't mean you hit a button and you're done. It goes from, normally somebody would be doing this for, like, just say that was my job. If I were to code up an agent to replace me, I don't remove myself from the picture. Instead of doing, 40 to 45 hours a week worth of work on this one kind of, job responsibility, I'm now spending 15 to 18 hours a week. So like I said, it collapses what I have to do, but it doesn't remove me from the equation. And so to your question of how does a company do that? I think the thing that I would say is, well, where are you blocked? Where do you think you're inefficient? And then interrogate those in a smart way. I would not go all in unless you don't have any choice. Like I said, if you're a 2-man shop, you don't have a social media person, but yet you want to build community, great. I would investigate that, straight away. Because if you spend all your time doing social media, what are you not doing, right? What's the opportunity cost for a small shop, right? If you're a really big group and you've got your framework and your pipelines, but yet you feel like they're broken, like, interrogate solutions here in non-impactful ways to see what you learn. I don't know that a lot of companies have the luxury of, let's just take 2 months off and learn AI. And the other thing you learn, there's a saying, I don't know if you know, called the Red Queen race, right? From like, you're running as fast as you can just to stay in the same position. That's what AI is. Because of, you look at Gemini 3 just came out, and now GPT 5.1 is going to come out with something called, it has the dumbest name. It's called Garlic, I want to say. They issued a code red, and now Chat GPT Garlic is on its way out to compete with Gemini. Every model is trying to one up each other so fast, and there's so much drinking from the fire hose. It's not like, oh, good, AI's done. Now we can learn it at steady state. Like, no, there's so many really smart, really clever models. And within the model, there's models, right? So there's GTP 5.1, 5.0, used to be 0.03 mini. And like, there's just so much stuff. You can't just say, now I know AI, now I can go back to my day job. Like, it's a constant learning. And a lot of the ways for me, the only way I learn is by using them and seeing what the output is.
Right. That was all my questions. So thank you so much for that and kind of guiding us through various trends. But hopefully people got some insights there about how you actually navigate the trends and decide which ones are the real thing and maybe which ones aren't. So I really appreciate your time then.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I love talking about the gaming industry. If I can help anybody, great. I certainly believe what I believe very strongly, but I have a saying that I have strong positions, but weakly held, right? Like I can let go of them if I know that I'm wrong. And so that comes from 30 years in this business of not being right all the time. If you've achieved ego death and you're in the games business, good for you. You're in a good position.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. We'll be back soon as ever with more interviews and the week in mobile games. So have a good day. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.